Imagine finding out that a kid you hung out with in high school became a serial killer. And now shame on you for thinking about a kid you hung out with in high school that you wouldn't be surprised became a serial killer. On this episode of Moving Panels, we discuss My Friend Dahmer. Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. I'm your host, Laramy Wells, and joining me today in the co-host chair is my favorite true crime junkie, my wife, Bethany Wells.
Well, you know, much like Jeffrey Dahmer, I'm here to clean up the streets, so...
That's wrong. Alright, so if the audio sounds a little different than usual, Bethany and I are actually on vacation.
Yes.
And so we are doing a mobile record here, just setting up in our room here. So just letting you know, that might be why the audio is a little off. But today we're going to talk about My Friend Dahmer, which might surprise people, is based on a graphic novel, and is kind of a autobiography / biography of a telling of Jeffrey Dahmer from, where does it start? Middle school age?
The movie starts in high school, but they met in middle school.
Yeah. Yeah, the graphic novel starts in middle school all the way through graduating, and it's the author of the graphic novel was actually quote unquote friends with Jeffrey Dahmer. It's a weird relationship.
I think, especially for someone like Jeffrey Dahmer, that group was about as close to friends as he could get.
Oh, definitely. So before we get into this, though, since Bethany is the true crime junkie, as I said earlier.
Aficionado is the term I prefer.
Listening to true crime podcasts, watching YouTube videos.
I read books.
Yep, read books. I'm going to let her give a quick background of Jeffrey Dahmer for anyone who might be listening who is unfamiliar with this infamous serial killer. So go ahead, Bethany.
All right, so Jeffrey Dahmer, he was a unique serial killer in the sense that he killed men. He killed men that he slept with, and he ate some of the men. One of the things Jeffrey Dahmer was really known for doing is trying to preserve the skulls. He wanted to make like an altar to his victims. I will say, when I give this brief summary, I'm not going to give the names of the victims, strictly because in the past, the families of those victims have been unhappy when their loved ones' names are associated with Jeffrey Dahmer, which I completely understand and respect. You know, it's already horrible that they've lost someone they care about, someone so horrible. It would also be an added injury for the rest of history. Your loved one is associated with this monster. So that being said, you get kind of the hint with Jeffrey Dahmer at the very end of the book / graphic novel. His first murder happened like 2 weeks after he graduated from high school. Then supposedly he did not murder again for another
9 years.
Like 9 years. He had 17 victims overall. Most of his victims were minorities. In fact, the only victim that was white was his very first victim. And then they were men, and usually it was men that were involved in the gay lifestyle. And during the 80s and 90s, that was a big taboo subject. When Jeffrey Dahmer was finally captured, he had the audacity to be mad when people insinuated that maybe his murders were racially motivated. He claimed that they weren't. Although, if you really think about it, and this happens with a lot of serial killers, you'll find, they prey on victims who society tends to overlook. So not only were these victims gay, they were minorities. So when they went missing, the police usually responded with, they probably just ran away. That's the Atlanta child murders. It took forever for the police to finally start investigating that because people were just told that their 12-year-old child just disappeared, just ran away from home, which really doesn't happen as much as they wanted to say it did during this time. One of the most, I think, atrocious of his murders is this 14-year-old child. One of the things Jeffrey Dahmer wanted was he wanted to, and this is going to be a graphic podcast, more graphic than normal, I would say.
Probably.
He wanted a sex partner that he could completely control. He basically wanted, forgive me, but he wanted a sex doll, but a living one. He didn't want the partner to have any...
He wanted full control.
Yes. Yeah. He wanted to rape someone, and he didn't want them to fight back. That's what he wanted at the end of the day. So he found a 14-year-old boy. He lured him into his apartment. He raped this child. He then drilled a hole in his head in an attempt to kind of make him... basically, like, lobotomize them. Make them a vegetable so that they were still alive, but had no, like, basically could just breathe. And that's all they were capable of doing. Well, so Jeffrey Dahmer thought he had successfully lobotomized this child. He left and went to work. Well, when the child kind of regained consciousness, he left the apartment. These 3 women... Jeffrey Dahmer, also, he lived in a historically or predominantly black neighborhood. These 3 women that lived close by noticed this boy running around. The boy was naked. He was bleeding from his private areas. He was clearly confused and didn't know what was going on. And the women called the police. Well, as the police were showing up, so that's when Jeffrey Dahmer showed up. And he told the police, "Oh, no, this is my boyfriend. He just must have had too much to drink." Despite the fact that the women were like, "No, he clearly doesn't want to go with this guy. Like, something is wrong." The police didn't want to look into it. They told the women to shut up and mind their own business. And Jeffrey Dahmer continued murdering people.
Yeah, there are several times within this story, the real story, and then there's once... especially in the graphic novel, in which the police could have ended this long before it became worse.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a moment in the graphic novel that if the police had been a little bit more suspicious, if the police had...
investigated, taken the time.
Or, questioned maybe just a little bit more, then... the only death would have been Stephen Hicks. Which
still would have been one too many.
No, I agree. I agree.
And so finally Jeffrey Dahmer was caught. He was sent to prison in 1992. He was sentenced to life in prison in 1992. And was murdered in prison in 1994 in kind of a suspicious circumstances where basically the guards let it happen.
Yeah. Now, we wanted to tell this story because we want to make it clear that this graphic novel and this movie has nothing to do with any of that.
For the most part, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it ends with the murder of Stephen Hicks. But other than that, it has nothing to do with his crime spree. This is about a guy who knew Jeffrey as a kid, as a teenager, and what he experienced that he believes... You said it really well. What was Backderf's intention behind this story?
I think his intention was to show that when people especially when adults don't recognize what's going on in the children around them's life, that child is left to struggle on their own. Backderf says at the very beginning of the story, I have sympathy for Jeffrey Dahmer right up until he kills his first victim. Because once he makes that decision, that is a decision he made despite how he grew up, despite how he was before, he still made the bad decision of killing someone.
Yeah. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into this. So the graphic novel was released in 2012. The movie was released in 2017. The movie was directed by Mark Myers. This was his fourth movie, his all independent work. The movie actually was released at the Tribeca Film Festival prior to its full theatrical. I don't think it got a full theatrical release. I think it only got a limited theatrical release. Mm-hmm. But we are going to spend just a little time on the movie. There's not really a lot of characters to talk about.
And it's also weird saying characters because they're
all
people.
Real life people, yeah. Names have been changed to some of the friends that, Backdurf makes that known. It's pretty much his name and Jeffrey's family are the only real, quote-unquote, and Stephen Hicks. Are the only...
But even that, they don't give his name in the book or in the movie, I don't think.
Yeah, I can't remember.
I want to say maybe
I think they have like the book.
Okay.
I think it does in the book. I think if I'm remembering right in the movie when he picks him up, that he does introduce himself. And I think he at least says, "My name's Steven."
Yeah.
But anyway... so we'll talk about the author originally, the guy who is ultimately telling the story, and that is John Backdurf, known to all of his friends as just Durf, which I thought was weird because at first I thought his name was Durf Backdurf.
I think that's his pseudonym or his nom de plume.
Yeah, that's the name on the graphic novel.
Backdurf.
Durf Backdurf. But his first name is John. In the movie, he is played by Alex Wolff, who some of you might know as Spencer from the new Jumanji movies.
Yeah.
And those of you who are horror fans would recognize him as the brother from Hereditary. He plays Durf. And what did you think of Durf as the, I guess you would say, narrator?
I was very torn throughout the graphic novel as well as throughout the movie. I had trouble sometimes figuring out what his intention was. And sometimes I was like, is he just doing this to get attention? Is Durf Backdurf writing this story because he's like, hey, if he was on Jeopardy, that would be the story that they would talk to him about, is I went to school with Jeffrey Dahmer. And here's a brief history on it. The more I read it, the more research I did on it, the less I think that's true. He does seem to have a lot of compassion for Dahmer's upbringing.
Yeah.
But that being said, he also does not paint himself in a positive way.
No.
I found it interesting because he could have very easily been the friend saying like, hey, stop it, guys. We got to lay off some of this. Because if you haven't seen the movie or read the graphic novel, throughout the story, and this is true, is Backdurf and a bunch of his other friends had the Jeffrey Dahmer fan club. And Jeffrey Dahmer would do these little spastic twitches all over the place. And they thought it was hilarious. And then eventually, one guy in the group finally started saying, maybe we shouldn't be doing this anymore. Something about this feels wrong. And if I were telling the story, even if it wasn't true, I would maybe even make that myself. But Backdurf doesn't make himself a very sympathetic character.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, the Jeffrey Dahmer fan club were, I guess the word would be exploiting Dahmer.
Yeah. For
the way Dahmer acted.
For the attention that Dahmer got.
Because they weren't really his friends.
No.
But they didn't dislike him. But he was more of
a mascot.
Yeah. He was more of a mascot. He was more of a clown for them to just have entertainment with. I mean, there's a whole moment in the story where they go to a mall and kind of just tell Jeffrey just to do this huge spaz out in the middle of the mall and all around the mall, and they're just watching and laughing. This is that the same mindset in the 70s as people have now with, watching TikToks and,
right.
All these fail videos.
Although this felt more of a, Dahmer originally said that he was making fun of this man who had cerebral palsy.
Yeah. Interior decorator.
It was an interior decorator who had cerebral palsy, and he was making fun of him. And he would do that by just, screaming and twitching and acting like he was having a seizure, basically.
Yeah.
In the middle of a hallway. He would just flop to the ground.
But the novel more implies that he was probably imitating his mother.
Right. His mother suffered from extreme mental illness and would go on and off of medication. And apparently when she was off medication was when she would have fits or episodes similar to what he was imitating.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and jump into her. So
Okay.
Joyce Dahmer in this movie is played almost unrecognizable
Yes.
By Anne Heche. I'll actually admit I thought for a minute it was Judy Greer. But
she would have been good too.
Then once you watch it a little bit more, you realize it's Anne Heche. So what did you think of? I think she gives probably the best performance.
She does an
movie.
amazing job in the movie. I will say, my only issues with Joyce is the actual person, Joyce Dahmer, passed away before Jeffrey Dahmer was ever identified as a serial killer. So a lot of blame gets put on her, the way she raised him, the way she was when he was first born, the way she treated him. And I'm not saying she was perfect, and I'm not saying what was said about her wasn't true. I'm just saying she tends to be the blame. Because they say, oh, well, he had a normal childhood, except for his mom was crazy. But, and correct me if I'm wrong, Laramy, if I had a severe mental illness, wouldn't it make the most sense for our family for you to be with us, spend more time with us, so that I could have a support system while raising our children?
Yeah, that's kind of tough because part of her mental issues and all, I really think it needed attention.
I agree, but I felt also at the same time is that she did not have a support system. She was not receiving that support from her husband.
Okay, I get what you're saying now, yeah. Yeah.
Because, they talk all the time about, well, she was crazy and she's kind of the reason. But also, the dad was never home. Ever. They made that very clear throughout any story I've heard, is he was never around. And it wasn't a surprise that she had those struggles. And it was clear and obvious that she struggled. And there was no support system for her. Now, to be totally transparent, I've had 2 children, and postpartum depression can really, it's a very difficult thing to struggle with. And I'm not saying, because she passed away, she was never able to defend herself or speak up for herself. The only person who could, I feel like, non-biased, say something would be Jeffrey Dahmer's brother. And he understandably has made it very well known he does not want anything to do with that. He has changed his name. He has nothing to do with his brother. He does not want any part of that story. That being said, I feel like Joyce has been the scapegoat throughout, when at the end of the day, it is just as much his dad's fault and just as much Jeffrey Dahmer's fault.
Yeah.
And, I'm not saying she was perfect.
As almost any other adult in Jeffrey's life.
And I'm not saying she was perfect. She should not have left her son just live on his own with nothing. But also, I think she had been pushed past her point. Past her point of being able... She was in survival mode, I think, from the minute she was born until the day she died, which she died at a young age. So I always feel bad. And I think as a mom myself and as a person who, I don't know, sees how women are treated, it's difficult to put so much. I hate the fact that, and hate's a strong word, I don't like the fact that in this story, in many stories, a lot of the blame gets put on her mental illness, when if her mental illness was so obvious, why was her husband not willing to support her, get her the help she needed, be there for her and her kids? Like, okay, he's not going to be able to solve her problems, but why can't he be there for his children? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about Lionel a little bit later, because the way he's portrayed in the movie versus the way he's portrayed in the graphic novel. But let's go ahead and just finish this out and talk about Jeffrey Dahmer himself, played by Ross Lynch, who surprised me and Bethany because our
familiarity.
Yeah, I can speak. The way that we were familiar with Ross Lynch was because our daughter Ruby watches Austin and Ally.
Yeah.
And he plays Austin.
Because we're sitting there going like, oh, I know him from somewhere. And then I think we finally gave up and looked at IMDb, and I was like, oh, that's Austin of Austin and Ally.
Yeah. I even remember when I looked it up, and I was like, oh, that's Ross Lynch that plays Austin and Austin. Like, Ruby heard it, and she was like, what?
Nope.
Yeah, you're not watching this one. You're not watching this one. So, ultimately, what did you think of his performance as Jeffrey Dahmer?
I thought he did a great job. I mean, he really embodied that character of just, you couldn't tell what was going on in his head, which is a lot of times how he was described not only in the book, but like when people talk about him, he did really good
of having that blank stare.
Yeah, that 1,000-yard stare of just
where you didn't know where he was mentally, and you could also he did really well with just the awkwardness that Jeffrey had. You know, kind of, you can imagine Jeffrey was trying to fit in, but he knew he didn't fit in.
Yeah. And he didn't know how to interact with people. He
knew that he was different, that something about him was different.
Yeah.
And you could see that in Ross Lynch's performance. And I think it was pretty good.
Yeah, I agree. I thought he did a great job. One of the things that frustrates me the most with Jeffrey Dahmer is I feel like, especially once he was caught, he admitted to a certain amount of crimes. I personally think he killed more than 17 people. I don't believe he took 9 years and didn't hurt anyone. Years later, it came out that, and this was after he was murdered in prison, was that he had actually raped at least two of his bunkmates when he was in the Navy. So I also believe his dad knew more than what he ever let on. That being said, I think Jeffrey Dahmer liked the attention. Once he was caught, people gave him that attention, and he fed into it.
And I think it was that same idea of he wanted to fit in. He wanted to be part of the crowd.
Right.
And so once he got caught and he got that recognition, he enjoyed it because it was
the first time in his life probably he got attention.
And I also, that's what I think part of it was him actually getting attention, which, as we've already alluded to, he did not get as much from his parents or from any adult, really, that he should have.
One of the stories, I don't know if you're planning on talking about this later, one of the stories in the book that just drove me crazy, and it's in the movie a little bit, but was his drinking.
Yeah.
Like, how do you drink that much at school and not one single adult ever says anything to you.
Yeah, as a teacher, that was hard to grasp, to think about. Like, I mean, because there's even times in the graphic novel where you're going, he's just, like, he's not in class. And I mean, a teacher's going to notice that. And if it
I don't
becomes
care what year it is. Like, there used to be truant officers. I mean, how is he not being...
And even the fact that the graphic novel implies that, and again, everything is from Bagdurf's, what he knows, what he talked to other people, and what they remembered. But they show that he would just leave the bottles, the empty bottles, there, outside the school. And you would think that as administrators, as teachers, when you're finding that stuff, as frequently as they kind of show that he was doing it, like, once you go, okay, somebody is clearly, there's a kid clearly going outside of this school and drinking on a regular basis. And so you would put somebody out there to watch.
My thing, too, is I know he's always been weird. He's always been the outcast. He's always been a loner, pretty much. If you can see that there's a child, because he was a child.
Yeah,
he's going through
don't they
something.
Say he started drinking in middle school, don't they?
Like 14.
Yeah.
And, like, if you can see that shift in a child of something's not right, if you think about how many teachers you had in high school and not a single one of them could reach out at least to his parents and say, hey, something is going on. I mean, you're a teacher, and I'm sure you could speak to this. If you noticed one of your students was, to the point of being an alcoholic at the age of 15, how could you not say something?
It's not so much, how could I not? I mean,
legally required.
Yeah, I'm legally got obligated to. We're mandated reporters. So, yeah, that just, it really bothered me with all of that. And so, yeah, this doesn't shine a great light on the adults.
No.
And I know you talked about that a lot of the blame is put on Joyce. I think it's spread out among all the adults that...
I agree. I will say Bagdurf does a better job of spreading it out a little bit more with a focus being on Joyce. I'm saying in general, when people talk about, like when I listen to the true crime podcast, when I watch the documentaries, that one documentary we watch where they actually interviewed his father and former stepmother, it seemed like so much was put on Joyce, whereas it was always Lionel. Well, Lionel tried to help. Lionel did that. No, he didn't.
Yeah.
He did not try to help him. And I'm not even saying like, because I remembered one of the things we were listening to was talking about how if my child seemed interested in something I was interested in, I would be excited about that. So I'm not even talking about when Lionel like gives him the embalming stuff, because Lionel was a chemist. And Lionel tries to teach him how to preserve dead animals and things like that. I'm not even really putting the blame there. I'm saying not being there when your wife is clearly struggling to the point where she cannot care for your children, he never stood up and picked up the slack.
Yeah. Yeah, the scene in the movie where they're eating dinner and they realize that the chicken is still undercooked. Mm-hmm. Again, as the dad, you think, okay, well, let's pop that back in the oven or something. But instead, Joyce just says, well, we eat our mistakes. And pretty much is now forcing them to eat raw chicken. Yeah. And that's another time where I just can't believe that Lionel just allows that to happen. Right. Doesn't say anything.
Right. I had even forgotten about that part. But yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of blame. I even have trouble with the adults in the school. Like, not one single person could... I mean, did kids not go to the doctor once a year? Like, could the doctor not tell that this child was an alcoholic?
I don't know.
I mean, it's heartbreaking to think, because, I mean, this is just a story we know about. This is just a story that's been sensationalized. There's no telling how many other people have experienced things. Maybe those people didn't move on to become mass serial killers.
Yeah.
But could still be struggling with something. Addiction, self-harm, other types of problems. And it all kind of comes down to, why did nobody see it? Could nobody have just, like, it makes you wonder if one person had just said, like, hey, Jeffrey, you okay? What's going on? Let's talk about it. And, like, gotten him the help he needed. Would we even be discussing this right now?
Yeah. And that's the thing. You know, we want to emphasize the same thing that Backderf emphasizes with the graphic novel, is we're not trying to give excuses for Jeffrey Dahmer.
Because he still made that decision.
Yes. We're not really trying to get you to empathize with a serial killer.
No.
Or have any sympathy for a serial killer. What this story is doing, and what, you know, the stuff we're talking about, is to show that had someone said something, had something been done, had, you know, just the littlest thing been different, how could that have affected the future for Jeffrey Dahmer?
I think also it kind of teaches you to empathize with the people around you. Like, maybe take notice of that weird kid. Talk to them. See why they're weird. Are they just weird because that's a phase they're going through? Or are they weird because they're being abused at home? They are struggling with X, Y, or Z. And having empathy for those around you, I think, would be a good takeaway from this story. But not necessarily Jeffrey Dahmer in particular, who did make the decision. Because, you know what? Not everybody, lots of people come from troubled households. Lots of people have struggled with addictions. Not lots of people have murdered 17 people.
What seems to be the problem, pal?
There's just so much pain in the world, so many issues. I don't think I can bear it.
Hell, friendo, it sounds like you could use a dose of pop culture roulette.
Pop culture roulette? What's that? Some sort of pop culture themed podcast or something?
That's right, sonny boy. When hope seems far, dive into some PCR.
But I already get my entertainment news from Variety.
Huh, that's pretty good. If you're a chucklehead, PCR gives you news you need, condensed, unfiltered, and raw, from three nerds who know a little something about something.
Wow, okay, sign me up.
That's the spirit. Pop Culture Roulette. New episodes every Monday, available on all major podcast directories.
All right, so the first half of this show kind of, you know, went in a very dark place. And I mean, this is
a podcast about Jeffrey Dahmer went into a dark place?
Yeah, this is a dark story.
Yeah.
You know, we're still going to talk about some really heavy stuff, but hopefully we can entertain a little bit more as we go along. So again, this is based off of a graphic novel, a very stylized graphic novel, a very unique graphic novel. There's not too many drawings in comics that I've seen take this style.
Right.
Backderf definitely had a very unique, and this is something he was doing back when he was in school with Jeffrey Dahmer. There's even I think they use it in the movie.
They also use it, it's in the graphic novel, or at least it was in the one I saw, where he drew pictures of Jeffrey Dahmer as in like different positions, like Jeffrey Dahmer in a trash can, Jeffrey Dahmer doing, you know, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And those pictures are actually in the graphic novel, and they fit right along with, you know, the actual more mature drawings that he has.
Yeah, but that goes in with us talking about Jeffrey being a mascot, because Backderf would even just draw him on things that were promoting like something else at the school,
right?
And Jeffrey Dahmer would the cartoon version of Jeffrey Dahmer would be on the flyer.
I mean, one of the stories throughout, and this a real story, and they even have in the graphic novel a picture from their yearbook, is because within the Jeffrey Dahmer fan club, they had somebody that was on the yearbook staff, or multiple people were on the yearbook staff. And they would try to sneak Jeffrey Dahmer into every single yearbook group picture, despite whether or not he was actually in that group.
Yeah, like the club pictures.
Yeah. And a teacher found out that they had done that. And so she went through all the pictures and she blacked out his face. And so in the yearbook, there are pictures of him with like a black dot. And it's really creepy knowing what he went on to do. Yeah. But that all happened before he ever murdered someone.
And they have one of those actual photos in the graphic novel.
Yeah.
Just to show that. But so let's go to the graphic novel, which, as I mentioned earlier, Backderf released in 2012, although he says he started writing it in 2002. And so, it took him time to get all the interviews. He read through Lionel's book that Lionel wrote. He went back, got in touch with anybody he could. He went through the Dateline NBC interviews that Dahmer did right before his death. And he went through all of that, and he compiled together this graphic novel. Just overall impression, what did you think of the graphic novel?
I really enjoyed it. I liked the style where in the moments that, for the majority of it, it's a black and white graphic novel. And the majority
for
of
all of it, it's black and white.
Well, the entire thing is black and white, but what I was going to say is the majority of it, it's white background with black outline. Whereas when it gets into the darker times in Jeffrey's life, it becomes a black background with white outline to kind of emphasize the struggles, the darkness that he's going through. Mm-hmm. It was a well-told story. I think I read it in just like an hour or two.
You're a fast reader, though.
I'm not a fast reader, but I did enjoy it. It's it really tugs at your heartstrings. And it also, you made the joke at the beginning. It makes you think back to that person in school. When we're 16, you can't be mad at yourself for how you treated people when you were 16. Or you can't feel guilty about it. Because you're not mature enough to understand the implications. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying an adult should be there to correct you and teach you through that. But it makes you think back to the person who is the outsider, the weirdo. We all have that one person. We're all thinking of that person.
Or we were that one person.
I was going to say, if you're not thinking of that person, it was you. And that's okay. Everybody is a weirdo a little bit. But I thought it was good storytelling. I like that Backderf didn't make himself a sympathetic character. I enjoyed it. What did you think?
No, I liked it. He tells a great story. Mm-hmm. There are even pages with little to no dialogue that he also tells a really good story through.
Yeah.
Especially some of the scenes with Jeffrey, like finding a dead animal.
Yes, I thought those were really good. And the way they were translated into the movie was really good.
Yeah. So, obviously with this being moving panels, we like to talk about the comparisons to the movie versus the comic. This, of course, is a graphic novel, so it's the same story. There's nothing to compare there. But there are some differences. Obviously when you're making a movie, you're making it in a different medium. You're making it for a different type of audience. And so let's talk about some of the differences that I think some of it was good, some of it wasn't so much. The first of which is Jeffrey's involvement in school. Right. So as we've already talked about, the main thing is that Jeffrey doesn't belong. Jeffrey is alone. And that's a key element to, and again, I'm going to say the character of Jeffrey Dahmer. Is that he is alone. And in the graphic novel, Backderf relays that.
Right.
That Dahmer is a loner. Again, when he doesn't want to be in the school, he goes out and he drinks. When he doesn't want to be around the house, he's either just walking down the road or he's back in the woods. He's always alone.
Which also, if you're very interested, the house that they filmed at for this movie, Jeffrey Dahmer's house in the movie, was Jeffrey Dahmer's real house in real life, which I thought was just bonkers. But he's got, the house goes straight into the woods, so he's always running off into the woods. And he's very isolated. And they do a good job in the graphic novel of depicting that. Now, I'm not an expert on Jeffrey Dahmer, but I believe that's how he really was.
Yeah, but in the movie, he's a little bit more social. Mm-hmm. They not only do they have the Jeffrey Dahmer fan club, but I mean, at times he's hanging out with them. Right. He's walking down the hall, talking with them or laughing with them. He also he's involved with tennis and track. Yeah. He's in the marching band. We have the scene where we know he's in the marching band, and to me that stuff doesn't work because it makes him not the loner. It makes him look like he, does have other things to think about and other things
right.
to do. And I think the whole idea of Jeffrey Dahmer is that he didn't. And so
I agree with that to an extent, but if you think about the sports that he's playing, tennis and track, it's not like he's playing doubles tennis. They're isolating sports. Because that was another thing about Jeffrey Dahmer, is he was actually very athletic. His father wanted him to lift weights. He became a very athletic person, but he doesn't really do team sports.
He was a marching band in the movie.
Well, so. That's okay. But I'm not disagreeing with that. But I will say tennis, track, those are isolated sports. You rely on yourself. You don't really need a teammate. It's still an isolated activity. Yeah. I'm not disagreeing with you that it doesn't work as well, but I will say
you think that was their intention of why they had him involved in those particular sports.
Right.
Yeah. Again, my thing is just the social nature of Dahmer.
Right.
Dahmer's, again, character in terms of his awkwardness and whatnot would not allow him to really want to do things like tennis and things like track or band, in my opinion.
I don't disagree with that fully, but I do think, like I said, his dad wanted him, and I think he looked up to his dad a lot because he wanted to do the things his dad did. And his dad wanted him to become more athletic, more fit. And so they could have translated that. And I don't know for sure if he really did those sports or not. But I could see that being kind of an excuse in the movie to be like, why does he look so fit when all he does is sit in someone's basement and mope?
Yeah, well, I mean, they do have where his father gives him the weights. And so you got to think if you're just sitting there, you're working out mm-hmm. with the weights. But let's go ahead and get into the differences in Lionel in terms of how he's represented. In the graphic novel, he is, as Bethany has said, he has no involvement.
He is a lot more involved in the movie.
Yes, and that's what we were going to talk about is in the movie, he's there several times. There's the scene where Jeffrey has the little shack out in the woods where he has kept all of these dead animals in jars and where he conducts his little experiments.
Yeah, I mean, he admitted to this. He told stories about this. He would walk down the side of the road and pick up roadkill, and then he would bring it back to his little shack and try to preserve it. One thing that he was really interested in was preserving skulls. Jeffrey Dahmer never figured out how to perfectly preserve a skull. It would always get too brittle and break, or he would, basically he couldn't figure out how to strip a skull and still maintain the integrity of the skull. And that started at a very early age when he started experimenting with roadkill, which was initially supported by his father because his father tried to help him learn how to do it. And then his father was like, oh, that's weird. Time to cut this out.
Yeah, which leads to the moment I was talking about in the movie. Lionel destroys Jeffrey's shack. And as he's destroying the shack, he is telling Jeffrey, you need to find stuff to do.
Yeah.
You need to be more normal. You know, because
that works every time.
Yeah.
Every time I'm told to be more normal, I'm more normal. Because
like Bethany is saying, he was fine with Jeffrey doing this stuff when he was little. But now he's, in high school. He's, reaching an age where he needs to be more social. He needs to be out there more. And again, they're portraying Lionel in the movie as if he's a concerned dad, at least in this moment. But yet it never goes anywhere further than that.
And I feel that way about Lionel often, because it seems like Lionel, since it has come out about Jeffrey Dahmer, has always been like, oh, well, I tried to help him. And I think if Joyce had been alive, you could have gotten both of those perspectives. All we have is Lionel's perspective, because I believe he's still alive. And he still tries to play like, oh, well, I tried. But we can never know for sure because we only have his side of the story.
Yeah. The other member of the Dahmer family that we haven't talked about an awful lot is his brother David.
Yeah.
The movie, he's only in a couple of scenes.
I don't even know if he has lines, does he?
He does. I know in that dinner table scene where they have the raw chicken. But yeah, we see him briefly. They do make it look more as if David might be the one person that Jeffrey really does care for. And again, that's just in the movie. Because in the graphic novel, Backderf made it clear, and this is from Backderf himself. It's a quote that said, his younger brother Dave was nearly 7 years younger than him. Dave isn't part of this story. He was just a kid and went beneath my notice. He certainly had a big role in Jeff's life, but I didn't witness it. So David's almost not in the novel at all. And like I said, and then the movie, he's in a few scenes up until the point where Joyce takes him when she decides to leave.
And it does beg the question, like, was there more to that story? Because David has made it very clear in the many, many years since Dahmer was found out for being what he really was, he wants nothing to do with that story. He does not want to be part of that story. Was there more to that? And because Joyce is gone, he is the only one who has that information. I fully support and respect the fact that he says, nope, I don't want that to be part of my life.
Yeah.
But it does beg the question of, like, is there more that he knows, but he is protecting himself, which he should do. And it just, I always do wonder about David.
Real quick, I want to talk about another of the quote-unquote characters that we didn't talk about earlier, but just because of the way he's portrayed in both the novel and the movie, and that's Lloyd Figg.
Yeah.
Who is one of the members of the Jeffrey Dahmer fan club.
Is he really a fan club member? Because it kind of felt like he was more of an outsider than Dahmer was.
Yeah, I could see that. In the book, he's portrayed as just being kind of very...
He's a psychopath.
Yeah, disturbed. But it's more on the side of he's just... he's crazy. I mean...
Yeah, he's clearly struggling with some things at home. I think they make it clear that his father might be abusive, and he clearly is struggling with something. Again, and I think that also kind of paints the picture that we were talking about earlier of you've got these two people. One of them has both of them have really bad home lives. But one of them becomes a serial killer. Not both of them.
Yeah. At the end of the graphic novel, Backdorf actually draws in a couple of pages of the moment that he found out in 92 about Jeffrey Dahmer being a serial killer. And his wife says, you went to school with him. And Backdorf's initial thought was Fig. That was his first thought.
And then his second thought was Dahmer.
And when his wife says, no, that's not the name, he realizes it's Jeffrey Dahmer. But he even says there's a little box that talks about, Dahmer was my second guess. Now, in the movie, Fig, in my opinion...
you could have written him out of the story.
Well, but they make him a little bit more scary. Not so much that he's this crazy, crazy kid that's always coming in and doing things. In the movie, they almost make him look like he could already be a killer.
Now, I know, because I read things on a Kindle, whereas you read the book.
Physical book.
The physical book. In the Kindle version, they had some deleted scenes. Stuff that Derf had considered including in the story, but had deleted them because they didn't really play into it. And a couple of those panels were about Fig. And he was a very violent guy. He was unstable. He talked about how they would see animals in the road, and
unstable,
Fig would
that's the word I was looking for earlier.
Yeah. They would see animals in the road, and he would speed up to try to run them over. And Jeffrey Dahmer was disgusted by this guy.
Well, don't they have that in the movie?
Yes, but that was supposed to be in the graphic novel. It was deleted from it.
Yeah, and
there's
that's
a lot
what I'm
more
talking
about Fig that was taken out of the graphic novel.
There's a part where Fig and Dahmer are in the woods, and Fig actually grosses Dahmer out, where Dahmer has to turn around and run away.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying, is that in the movie, which, like you're saying, if that was meant to be in the graphic novel, maybe there's more truth to it. But like I said, just his portrayal in the comic versus the movie definitely ramps up Fig, his unstableness,
right,
if you will,
instability.
Speaking of ramping it up, let's talk about the ending.
Okay.
And again, I mean, as much as we've talked already, you know that we spoil things on here. So we're going to talk about the ending of both the graphic novel and the ending.
Can you spoil a true story?
Well, you can this one, because people don't know this story without either
That's
reading
true.
the book, or this isn't a story that's really out there, like what you told at the beginning about the actual killings. But in the book, the book ends with Jeffrey being alone. Mm-hmm. His dad has left. His mom and brother have left. They've graduated high school, so the Jeffrey Dahmer fan club has kind of gone their separate ways. Yeah. They're all getting ready for college. They don't spend any time with Jeffrey anymore. And he's alone in his house. He decides to drive around. He finally gets up the nerve of, hey, I'm going to do... We haven't talked about the jogger. There's a jogger throughout both the graphic novel and the movie.
And this was a real story, because I want to say I've even heard an interview where Dahmer told this story.
So he's constantly watching a jogger. The movie ends up making the jogger Jeffrey's doctor.
Yeah. Which
was a weird scene, and I'm not going to talk anymore about that scene. The graphic novel, he's just a jogger. And at one point, Jeffrey, I think, gets up the courage that he's going to commit his first, maybe not murder,
but at least rape.
He's gonna assault the jogger, and he has a baseball bat.
It's like a big stick. He finds a big stick in the woods, and he waits for him. This jogger drove down this road every single day. He waited for him in the bushes, but on this particular day, for reasons unknown to everyone, that jogger did not run past Jeffrey.
Yeah.
Which possibly could have saved his life.
Yeah, I mean, he could have been Jeffrey's first victim. But back to the ending of the graphic novel, we do see him commit his first murder. Mm-hmm. We see him pick up Stephen Hicks. They go back to the apartment, and he proceeds to
beat him with a dumbbell.
Yeah, beats him with one of the dumbbells his father gave him, and he cuts up the body, puts it in trash bags. We have a moment which I really think... I get the movie ending where it ended, but I think I would have liked to have seen this in the movie, where he is on his way to take all the bagged up body parts to the dump, and he gets pulled over.
Right.
And you even... Backdurf drew Jeffrey being frightened, being scared that he's been caught.
Right.
Which makes you think, had he actually been caught...
Would that be it?
Would we be
talking about him?
Yeah. Would he have just been... It would have just been the one murder of Stephen Hicks, and he wouldn't be the serial killer that he became. And we see that moment. The cops even ask about the trash bags in the back, and he's just saying, I was just getting rid of some stuff, and they're suspicious about it because it's in the middle of the night. And
as they should be, because it was a dead body.
But yeah, they didn't bother to pursue that any further, and they just let Jeffrey go, and Jeffrey decides he's just going to go right back home. We then have a moment in the next scene of the novel where Jeffrey is just walking down the side of the road
in the middle of the night,
and a friend named Mike from school sees him and offers to drive him the rest of the way back home. And they do, and there's nothing more about this scene. It is exactly that. He drives them home. They have just a casual conversation. Jeffrey gets out. Jeffrey waves goodbye. Mike goes to pull away, and then they show how the bags, the body parts, are still in Jeffrey's car. So Mike was right there with these body parts, just a few feet in front of him. So we get that moment, and
it's not very cinematic, though.
No, yeah, and that moment's not very cinematic. So we go to the movie, and they kind of do this scene, mm-hmm. but they twist it, and they give it a little bit more of a horror movie feel.
Yeah, it's very intense, even though I knew what was happening was not going to happen.
Yeah. So what they have instead is that instead of it being some random friend named Mike, they actually have it be Backdurf that picks Jeffrey up.
Which, to be fair, if you were just telling this from a film perspective, it makes more sense for it to be Backdurf and not random dude.
Yes.
Because if it was a random dude, you don't have that Backdurf narration like you do in the graphic novel. It's just like, who's this guy? Why do we care that this...
But as soon as he's picked up, it already starts into the things are getting creepy mm-hmm. aspect, because they don't have a casual conversation on the way back. It's a very awkward conversation where you can tell from Alex Wolff's performance, Backdurf is getting a little uncomfortable and, is a little unsure of things.
Doesn't he have blood on his hands too?
Oh, I can't remember that. But they get to Jeffrey's house, and Jeffrey talks Backdurf into coming in for a beer.
Which is how he lured most of all of his victims, I want to say, is like, mm-hmm. hey, you want to come in, have beer? A lot of times it was young sex workers, and so he would say I'll give you $50 if you pose for some pictures for me. And that's how he would lure his victims into his apartment, and then he would drug them and do the things he did.
So this is just going to be, hey, buddy, it's been a while. Why don't you come in for a minute? We'll have a beer. And Backdurf, I would say, based off of the performance Wolff gives, reluctantly decides to go in.
Yeah.
Although as soon as he enters the house, we go full horror movie. He enters the house. The atmosphere of the house is just creepy.
Well, he doesn't have any power.
Yeah, there's no lights on or anything because since Mom and Dad have both left, nobody's been paying the power bill. And so there's no power. And Durf, you can tell Durf's just getting a bad feeling, which he should because Jeffrey has picked up a baseball bat.
Behind him,
and he's behind him. Durf decides to leave. He goes, you know what? I need to go. I just need to go.
Yeah, my mom's looking for me. I need to go.
Yeah. Jeffrey follows him out, and as he's walking back to his car, Jeffrey raises the bat.
It's like he's coming after him like Jason style.
Yeah, he raises the bat.
And I think the most intense part of that is Alex Wolff does a very good job of being cool because he doesn't know what's going on behind him. He's just trying to leave. So he's just like, oh yeah, man, I'm looking forward to starting school and blah, 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 blah. Yeah.
But then he turns and Jeffrey puts the bat down. You can tell Wolf plays it off as if Durf realizes what just happened. Why do you have a bat? Mm-hmm. But he gets in the car. They say their goodbyes. This, of course, is implying that Durf could have been his first victim.
They really sensationalized that story.
And, of course, we know that this wasn't going to be the case because if Durf had been his first victim, we wouldn't have the story.
He wouldn't have written a graphic novel about it.
Yeah. And then the movie ends with Jeffrey picking up Stephen Hicks.
Yeah.
And as they drive off together, the movie gives its little wrap up with the text of what, the events that would occur. But again, that wasn't the point of this movie. So I think we've kind of given all of our review and talked through all of this. So let's go ahead and give our final decision. And here on Moving Panels, we call it Bag It, Stack It, or Trade It. So go ahead, Bethany, and tell us what you think of My Friend Dahmer.
I'm going to stack it. It's not quite something I think I'm going to return to on a regular basis. It's a very dark story. It's sad. I've seen it now. I'm glad I've seen it. I'm thankful for having seen it. But it's, as much as I do enjoy murder stories, it's not something I want to return to regularly. But if somebody is like, oh yeah, no, I really love serial killers. I'm interested in, Jeffrey Dahmer and blah, blah, blah. You should watch this movie. It's a really good interpretation of what happened in his early childhood.
Yeah. I mean, I had almost all the exact same things to say. This is a great movie to watch once. Again, I wouldn't watch it again unless, like Bethany said, someone else had an interest in the story. And then I would go, hey, look, let's check this out. And honestly, it's the same thing with the graphic novel. I mean, that's not a one to pick it up again and read just for fun like I would with some other comics. So yeah, the rewatchability is the main thing that puts it into a stack it. You have to be wanting to watch it.
Yeah.
I think also, this isn't a movie you could just...
If it was on TBS and I saw it, I wouldn't stop and watch from whatever point. It's a... Yeah. Oh, that's the Jeffrey Dahmer movie. Next.
Well, even without knowing it's the Jeffrey Dahmer movie, if you were to stumble upon this movie, I don't think it would grab your attention.
No, it's a very quiet movie.
Yeah, I don't think it would grab your attention. I think you would have to know what you're going in watching to want to see it. So I also say stack it. I think that's a safe bet for this one. If you haven't seen it, I do recommend it.
I highly recommend it, especially if you're interested in true crime.
Yeah, I recommend it. But we're going to keep that one as a stack it. And yeah, so there you go. So thank you, Bethany, for joining me.
You're welcome.
As always, and we're going to continue on our vacation here.
Yeah. It's been weird recording without Superman staring at us from every angle.
Yeah. Again, we're just in our room on our vacation, so we're not surrounded by our usual Superman stuff and our usual setup. But thank you, Bethany, for listening. Thank you, Bethany, for recording. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
I'm also listening right now.
And again, give us those 5-star reviews. Write a review. Might even read it on the show if you do. give you that shout out to thank you for a stellar review. Follow us on social media at Moving Panels. Email us, movingpanels@gmail.com. Before today, for Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.
Do you love movies of a certain age? Do you miss the days of VHS tapes and VCRs and video rental stores? Is the thought of another 80s movie being remade seem inconceivable? If you want to go back to school, back to the future, or even back to the beach, then the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast is for you. I'm Tim Williams, the creator and host, and on each episode, I'm joined by a guest co-host as we revisit a different 80s flick to discuss our first-time watch memories, iconic scenes, and even learn some behind-the-scenes stories along the way. New episodes drop every other Friday on your favorite podcasting platform. So make like a tree, get out of here, and go listen to an episode of the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast.